I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Good evening. Thanks for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. As many of our viewers will know, in Canada there are tens of thousands of children in the child welfare system. In Manitoba, there are roughly 11,000 kids in care. 90% of them are Indigenous. One of those people is our guest this week, Natasha Okemow. Natasha is a child welfare advocate for youth in care and started a program called Foster Up that helps kids who are aging out of care navigate the post-secondary education system. She's also a director for Manitoba in the Youth in Care Canada, and most recently partnered with APTN News for a 5-part podcast that was recently released called The Disappearance of Natasha Lynn Starr. Natasha, thanks so much for being with us here this week.
Thank you for having me.
I asked you prior to this if there were any locations in Winnipeg that you'd want to go to that hold some significance to you, and we're in front of one of them now, and maybe a little on what that significance is.
So I chose this location because this is the placement that I spent the longest time in when I was in foster care, and so I have a lot of memories of this place. I was able to kind of somewhat settle down in a sense here, but this home saw most of my adolescent years.
As you laid out in your podcast, The Disappearance of Natasha Lynn Starr, you spent most of your life bouncing around foster homes and were apprehended at the age of 1 from your mother and adopted at the age of 4. What happened next?
So I was adopted at the age of 4, and my adoption only lasted 10 years. The adoption ended up failing for one reason or another, and I re-entered the system at the end of grade 8 in the summer, and then from summer of grade 8 on, I just spent the rest of my life kind of bouncing into the system, in and around the system, and I finally aged out care when I was 21.
You had 12 different placements, 4 different schools. You lived in 5 different towns, had 5 different social workers. What has been the impact on you?
It's really hard to get attached to places, people, or things. It's really hard to open up to people and try and form those relationships because everything's always changing, and it's very difficult to believe that this is going to be your last place, or believe that this is a safe space for you, and that you don't have to worry about being taken to another home or another school or another community, another town. And for me, that uneasiness has been a crippling anxiety that's kind of followed me even to my adulthood, where I still am scared of ever being in one place for too long because I'm scared that a social worker is going to come take me. Even though I have been out of the system for 4 years now, I still have that fear.
There's one thing you talk about in the podcast that really sticks out for me, and that it kind of touches on what you're talking about right now, and that's that you keep a backpack, that's full of all your prized possessions, as you say, on you at all times. Why is that?
Just because when I was in care, I didn't have preparation time. So I'd be in class one day and I would get called at the office, and then the teacher would be like, your social worker's here to take you, you're going to your next placement, and I wouldn't have time to pack, I wouldn't have time to grab my belongings. So after having that happen to me so many times, I now just carry all my own prized possessions on me, so that way nothing gets left behind.
We speak obviously a lot at APTN News with people who have been in care or currently are in care, and we hear a lot about the loss of culture. Can you tell us about how that has impacted you?
Yeah, when I was adopted, I never knew who or where my bio parents came from, and so I was always told that I was a mix of something, but they never told me what. And as I didn't find out till I was 19, 20 that I was Jamaican and Cree. I didn't know where my parents were, and all that I had to kind of find on my own. And when I did find it out on my own, I felt kind of torn between 2 worlds because my parents are from 2 very different cultures, and being raised in a Mennonite culture as well, I felt I didn't know how to navigate all these different cultures because I grew up with the Mennonite culture, but deep down I know that I want to follow my mother's culture, my father's culture. I want to learn about that, and I just I felt like another crossroad. I felt like another crossroad, and it was really hard for me to kind of figure out my identity.
We're mentioning your podcast here quite a bit. It came out in September of 2019. Here's a preview for our audience.
The Millennial Scoop is not someone else's history. It's not just a short blurb, paragraph, introduction, or a chapter in a history textbook. It's my history. The disappearance of Natasha Lynn Starr.
And that was a preview of the disappearance of Natasha Lynn Starr. Natasha, it is a very personal story that you've laid out. Was it a difficult decision for you to decide to, lay this out bare for anybody to hear?
Yeah, it was hard kind of doing it at first. I had like a lot of flashbacks, a lot of memories. I honestly didn't know where to start because it wasn't just like one thing. There was multiple things that happened, and I didn't know how to like make sense of it, and I didn't know where. Also, yeah, I just didn't know where to begin. I was like, there was so much that happened, and when I wrote it out, I was like, oh my God, this is my life. Like, I'm like, I've been through some stuff. I'm like, and so it was a hard process, but I actually did find a lot of healing through sharing my story. I found a lot of just ways to kind of just get it out, and I found it to be very therapeutic, and I found I was doing it in a safe way. I felt like I was in full control of my story, and I think that's what made my experience at APTN so unique, was that I was able to write my own story the way I wanted to write it.
What are you hoping that people who are in care take away from the podcast?
I hope people who are in care, when they listen to it, that they know that they're not alone, that they have hope after listening to it. I get that my childhood years weren't the best, but I want them to know that they can achieve and become who they want to be. Growing up in care, no one really asks you what you want to be when you grow up. No one really asks you what your lifelong goals are. Mm-hmm. And I never really had a role model who I knew who made it out of the system, who went off to university. I was always told that I couldn't go to university, that I would be a lawyer, that I wouldn't achieve what I want to do. I was a dreamer, and I don't want kids' dreams in care to die. Just because you're in care doesn't mean your dreams have to die. And it is hard work. It's hard. It's like the fact that education and attaining education is so limited, like there's such limited funding. It's literally, I felt like it's kind of like a fight for your life, but I want kids to know that there are supports out there, there are resources, and I want them to know that they can do it. I want to give hope. I want them to take back that pen and rewrite their own story.
What do you want the average listener who's not in care or maybe not familiar with the system to know after listening to the podcast?
I guess I want the average listener who's listening to it to understand that this is still ongoing, that this is still happening in like 2019, that this is the damaging effects of foster care have really impacted not only my life, but continues to impact many youth's lives across Canada. And so my hope is that they'll, I don't know, just when they listen to it, maybe be less judgmental and a little more empathetic towards those who are growing up in care.
Well, and we're going to talk about some of those judgments, those assumptions that people have of kids in care, and also discuss some of the more of the advocacy that Natasha does. We're going to do that after we take a quick break and return here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Natasha Reimer Okemow, an advocate for children in care who recently partnered with APTN News on a 5-part podcast called The Disappearance of Natasha Lynn Starr, about her time, her experience as part of the Millennial Scoop, something we'll talk about here right away. And we're now at the Forks, and Natasha, another location that holds some significance for you here in Winnipeg. Maybe if you can tell us why.
Yeah, this is the first place I met my biological siblings, my twin sisters actually, and those were the first two of my biological family that I ever met. And they were passing through Manitoba, and they were like, "We're at the Forks. Do you know where that is?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know where that is." And they're like, "Do you have time to meet up?" And yeah, so this is where I first met them.
And you have a rather large extended family, I guess you could say. What was it like? How difficult was it to reconnect?
with the twins, it was easy, but then once I found out there was more siblings and the family was just bigger and got bigger, bigger and bigger, it was rather overwhelming because I was now filled with all these different people who I didn't know who were all wanting to have a relationship with me, and it was just, I just felt very overwhelmed, and that's something that I kind of like, I've had to take breaks from it because it was a lot because I was getting all this attention, and as you know, I grew up in foster care, so I wasn't really getting that kind of love and attention all the time, and so it was very overwhelming for me.
On a number of occasions, you and I both referenced the Millennial Scoop, the Millennium Scoop. For those unfamiliar with those terms, how would you describe?
I would describe it as the ongoing assimilation of Indigenous children and youth through the child welfare system. Case being me and my twin sisters were put into homes where we were not placed with Indigenous peoples. We never, for me personally, I never knew that I was Indigenous. I didn't know that I didn't know the history of my family. I didn't know any of that. And for me, I was also raised in a very Christian family, so I was told that anything other than Christianity was a sin. So for me, I was never given the opportunity to grow with my culture and grow knowing my teachings and all that.
One of the things that the podcasts do is trying to challenge people's assumptions about kids who grow up in the child welfare system, and I'd like to go through some of them. One of them is an assumption that children in care are bad or unworthy.
Yeah, there is always that. When I grew up in care, it was that assumption that if a kid was in care, they must have done something bad to be in the system. But never once was the adults brought in the conversation. Never once was the failings of the adults whose actions led, who significantly contributed to the kid landing up in the system or brought conversation. And I feel like the blame always falls on the kid in care, and I really want to shift that perception. And often those parents' wrongdoings often makes that people think that kid is bad automatically by guilty of association, and they're not bad. They're just in an unideal situation.
There's a whole episode of the podcast called "The System Is Whack." Can you explain that a bit for us?
Yeah, I was trying to when I was writing the script, I was and people would always ask me what was it like growing up in the system. I was like, whack. There was I had no other words for it. It was messy. It's whack when they have this whole one-size-fits-all kind of policy where it's in the best interest of the child. I found it whack with the multiple changes. I find it whack that a system that claimed to be acting in my best interest willfully ignored the fact that I was Indigenous and didn't think that would be a problem. To me, that is whack. And some of the foster placements I was in, I still don't know how some of them passed licensing requirements because, to be honest, it was just whack.
Despite those experiences that you went through, and we see a lot of the bad of the system in the media, but there is also some good out there, and you talk about that not everything about the system is bad, and not all placements are bad.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important to know that there are good foster homes, there are good foster parents, and they're not all bad. As I said in one of my episodes, the group home manager actually stepped down from her position and she took me in. She showed me the good in the system. And so there are good people there, and she accepted me as her own. She never once ever called me a foster kid. She called me her daughter. And it's little moments like that that showed me that there's the good in the system, acts of love, acts of kindness, and that, I don't know, made the journey a little less more painful.
And we're going to step aside for a quick break, but then we're going to come back and talk about some of the less painful things, I guess, in your life, some of the major achievements that you've been seeing lately. And we'll do that when we return here to Face to Face.
First entered the system at the age of 1. I was then adopted out into a white family. My name was changed. And I never got to ever reconnect with my biological family ever again. I didn't get to grow up learning about my culture. I didn't get to grow up learning my languages. And I spent a lot of time wondering who I was, where I came from, if my real parents were alive. And this isn't uncommon for kids in care. There's often kids in care being placed in homes that aren't equipped to deal with the sensitivity regarding the trauma and intergenerational trauma of residential schools Indigenous children have. And so for me, it was kind of a living nightmare growing up. I then re-entered the system due to my adoption failing at 14. And at that time, the message was just kind of survive, kid.
Welcome back to Face to Face. That was our guest, Natasha Okemow, as she was presenting to a standing committee on Parliament Hill on Bill C-92, a bill meant to affirm the rights of Indigenous peoples in relation to child and family services. And Natasha, what was that experience like for you, speaking to federal lawmakers about something that's impacted every aspect of your life?
It was actually very, very scary for me. I was extremely nervous. I remember right before I went in, I was just like, "Can I do this? Can I do this?" And then I realized that I am the expert of my life. I know the system. And in my speech, I even said to them, I said, "Kids in care know the situation better than anyone else." And I think it's those voices that should change the system. But at the same time, I was still super nervous because this system has It destroyed my childhood, and I'm never going to get those years back. And that's something I've had to kind of accept. And that's what also made it hard too. It's because I don't think, even though I've been able to achieve like numerous things, I was able to graduate university, I was able to do all these, speak at the study committee. At the end of the day, I'm never going to get those years back. I'm never going to get those relationships with my bio siblings back. I'm not going to get that. And so that's what makes it hard. It makes it hard because it still hurts. Yeah. So, but I felt very safe when I was speaking in front of them, and they were all very respectful to me. So I think that made it a lot more easier. But it was kind of hard to find your voice. It's kind of hard to share your story. It's kind of hard to open up because for so long growing up in care, I was never listened to. I was never really talked to. Everyone made decisions for me on my behalf in my best interests, but they always failed to ask me what I thought was best for myself. So now it's kind of weird. It felt weird for me now that I'm 25, and now they're asking me what I think the best call to action is to, in regards to this.
Are you hopeful that this bill can still make some changes in the lives of people?
I think that there's potential. I think that it could, but I think there needs to be some serious revisions done to it, and I think that they need to get it right. Like these are children's lives we're talking about. There's kids right now, as we speak, whose lives are being affected by the government's taking their time on this, and these are years that are being lost. And so I think that they need to do better. I think they need to do better faster, and I think they need to realize that they're dealing with people who are currently alive right now. And I don't want them to realize that this bill that they could have done better than have an apology for it years down the road.
Well, we've got one more video of you here. Let's take a look.
Natasha Dominique Reimer. Megan Rowe.
And so, Natasha, that was you, obviously, on graduation day in 2019 at the University of Winnipeg with a Bachelor of Arts degree majoring in criminal justice. After all that's been thrown at you, everything that you've gone through, what was that graduation day like for you?
To me, that graduation day meant more to me than my high school graduation. I was able to graduate and be identified as an Indigenous grad, so I was able to have like the Indigenous sash around me when I walked the stage. And to me, that was the part. I was way where I was stepping into my identity. It was finishing and graduating UW has helped me along my identity growth, and that grad was just very special to me because I kind of found myself at that place. It took a lot of time, but I kind of grew into my identity, and I kind of found out who I was, and it's still a journey, but it meant a lot.
When we're talking about post-secondary here, and we mentioned it before, you founded a peer group here in Winnipeg called Foster Up for youth who are aging out of the foster system and trying to do what you did, navigate the post-secondary education system. And why did you feel there was a need for this type of a program?
Because when I was aging out care, I remember wanting to go to university, and my social worker told me that there was no funding, there was no options, like that I had to figure out on my own. And so I did figure it out on my own, and I realized that when I wasn't part of the tuition waiver program, all of our identities were like sealed, so we couldn't really get to know each other. And when I met other kids in care who were in post-secondary, a lot of them had dropped out of the programs because they just couldn't handle all the changes because you're aging out of care, you're starting university, there's a lot of changes. So I wanted to create a supportive environment for those in and from care to be able to get together and be able to hang with people who get what it's going through, who understand what it's like to age out of the foster care system or spend your life in child welfare. And I also wanted to let them know that there was different options, resources, funding supports available to them that they didn't know about and that their social workers often didn't tell them about. So I really wanted to help them along the journey and not make it even more harder for them, but I wanted them to be able to know that there are options and not feel hopeless and know that there is a place for them where they can feel like they belong.
You know, we wanted to try and end on a bit of an upbeat with your graduation and all that you've accomplished, but the system doesn't really allow for that. You know, this is a system that, despite the fact that you've aged out and gone on to educate yourself and create a better life for yourself, that one day you or your children even, you can't escape this system.
No. So here in Manitoba, there will be a birth alert on me. It doesn't matter how many years it's been, doesn't matter that if I have a job or anything like that. In the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report, Women and Girls Report, it's stated that there was examples of women who had aged out of care long after who had their kids still taken. So the fact is that I'm kind of like living with this lifelong curse. Even though I've beat the odds of graduating and doing all this, it doesn't matter because they're ready to come take my kid.
Yeah, as we hear from many people, the system targets you for life.
Yeah, and it's a scary thought. It's a scary thought because I feel like there's no such thing as freedom. There's no such thing as freedom when you've grown up in the child welfare system. And to me, that's scary because, yeah.
Well, Natasha, we do want to thank you very much for speaking out, telling your story through the podcast, you know, speaking up for other people who aren't comfortable in their own voices, even though it took you a while to become comfortable in your own, but and congratulate you on all that you've accomplished, your graduation, and just for being such an advocate for everyone, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That is all the time we do have for Face to Face this week. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, shoot us an email at news@aptn.ca. This show and past shows are also available as podcasts, and you can find those at aptn.ca/face-to-face podcast. You'll also be able to find Natasha's podcast around that link as well. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time here on Face to Face.